Hello and welcome. Today we will talk about organizational factors related to ethical decision making and to business ethics. We will more specifically focus on the role of ethical culture in relationships regarding business ethics. This is chapter 7 of your textbook. In regards to organizational factors in business ethics, we will take a closer look at the corporate culture and the ways a company's values and traditions can actually impact the behavior of its employees. We also will discuss the role of power in influencing ethical behavior within a corporate environment. And there are going to be some organizational structures that either help or hurt ethical decision-making processes as well. In this chapter, the learning objectives are to understand the concept of corporate culture, to examine the influence of corporate culture on business ethics, to determine how leadership, power, and motivation relate to ethical decision-making in organizations, to assess organizational structure and its relationship to business ethics, to explore how the work group influences ethical decisions, and to discuss the relationship between individual and group ethical decision making. Overall, we will examine the implications of organizational relationships for ethical decision making in the work environment. When it comes to a definition for organizational or corporate culture, we can say that organizational cultures can include values, norms, in artifacts that influence employees and determine their behavior in any given day, any given week, or a year, or over time from a collective point of view for any organization. Culture gives the members of the organization some sort of meaning as well as the internal rules for their behavior at any given time. All firms, not just corporations, have their own unique or distinct culture which differentiates them from others. And those cultures at the organization are based on the values, the beliefs, the customs, the rules, and the ceremonies that are oftentimes accepted, shared, and circulated throughout the organization, which represents their overall culture. A company's history as well as their unwritten rules tend to be a part of their organization's overall culture. The role of corporate culture in ethical decision making is significant because the culture of a company may be explicitly articulated or even left unspoken at times. Explicit statements of values, beliefs, and customs usually come from higher level management, and they not only speak about it, but hopefully they role model those values and beliefs. Memos, written codes of conduct, handbooks, manuals, forms, and even ceremonies on a given day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month basis are all formal expressions of a company's overall corporate culture or organizational culture. These cultures are often expressed informally as well. For example, through comments that employees and managers make, both direct as well as indirect. And these comments actually communicate the wishes of the managers, the founders, or those who are influential within the organization. So the tone at the top is often cited as a determining factor in creating a high integrity organizational culture. There are some ethical frameworks and evaluations of corporate cultures that happen on a regular basis. Generally, there are two basic dimensions to describe an organization's culture. Either organizations are showing a high concern for people, or they're showing a high concern for performance, and then there are organizations who sort of balance the two sides of it. There are actually 4 organizational cultures. The 4 organizational cultures can be classified as apathetic, caring, exacting, and integrative. Let us look at these and what they mean. The apathetic culture shows minimal concern for either the people or for performance. The caring organizational culture exhibits high concern for people, but minimal concern for performance issues. So the relationship orientation would be high, but not so much the performance continuum. And remember that in apathetic cultures, there's minimal concern for either people or performance. Individuals focus on their own self-interest. In a caring organizational culture, there's high concern for people, but minimal concern for performance issues. So it can be a little bit difficult to find nationally recognizable companies that maintain little or no concern for performance because everybody cares about performance. An exacting organizational culture shows little concern for people, but high concern for performance. The exacting culture focuses on the interests of the organization. Integrative organizational cultures combine a high concern for people and a high concern for performance. An organization can become integrative when the senior level managers and superiors recognize that the employees are more than just interchangeable parts or resources. They are the most important human resource for the organization. Employees have an ineffable quality that helps the firm meet its performance criteria. Exacting organizational culture shows little concern for people, but a high concern for overall performance. In the last one, the integrative combines both high concern for people and high concern for performance. An organization becomes integrative when the superiors recognize that employees are more than just interchangeable parts. So when you actually look at people as being your human capital and one of the most important assets of any organization, then obviously you value them. And when you value employees, they in return value performance, so they can take pride in it and they can come to work feeling good when they leave. So therefore, both performance is high and concern for people are high and people feel appreciated. Let us talk about some company examples of the 4 organizational cultures that are typically talked about. That would be a caring culture, an apathetic culture, an integrative culture, and an exacting culture. So one example would be Ben & Jerry's related to a caring culture. Ben & Jerry's embraces community causes, treats its employees fairly, and expands numerous resources to enhance the well-being of its customers. Since I've met the co-founder of Ben & Jerry's, I can tell you that it really starts from the top, or the founders of the organization, where they try to measure the bottom line of how much good they do every single year to the communities where they operate. So they're a good example of a caring organizational culture. You can also have the Countrywide Financial, which is a good example of an apathetic culture. Countrywide seems to show little concern for the employees and customers. The company's culture appeared to encourage unethical conduct in exchange for profits. Now, that doesn't mean that they're always that way, but unfortunately, when 1, 2, or 3 employees or 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times they've made these decisions where they put profits over ethical decisions, that basically means that is the corporate culture. Starbucks can be an example of an integrative culture. Starbucks seems to look for ways to expand and improve performance. It also exhibits a high concern for people through community causes, sustainability, and employees' health care issues. And finally, an example of exacting culture would be United Parcel Systems, where employees are held to high standards to ensure maximum performance, consistency of delivery, as well as efficiency. And obviously, you can think of different organizations that you've seen or where you do business or where you're a customer to see where they fall. And you can think about what specific traits actually make them fall into one of these 4 corporate cultures. This is why, as an organization, you need to do a cultural audit every now and then. A cultural audit is basically an assessment of the organization's values. It is usually conducted by outside consultants, but may be performed internally as well. You just got to keep the data private, and information hopefully can be used to make continuous improvement and let people know how their voices are integrated into the decisions of managers. In cultural audits or assessment of an organizational values, they usually are conducted by outside consultants but may be performed internally as well. And keep in mind that communication about ethical expectations and support from top management tend to help to identify a corporate culture that encourages ethical conduct or one that leads to ethical conflict. Ethics can be a component of corporate culture, obviously. If a firm's culture encourages unethical behavior, then those employees will act unethically, as well as the opposite can be true. Management's sense of an organization's culture may not be in line with the values and ethical beliefs that actually guide a company's overall employees. When their sense of organizational culture is not in line with the values of the organization, that's a problem for the company. So it's important for top managers to determine what the organization's culture is and to monitor the values, the traditions, and the beliefs to ensure that they represent the desired culture so they can be role modeling the culture that every manager and all employees actually want to see. Overall, the rewards, the incentives, as well as the punishments that are imposed by an organization must reflect the culture that those at the top want to represent and those cultural values and norms and traditions the senior managers want to see and want to create. Sometimes you can have compliance-based cultures. At other times you can have value-based ethical cultures. A compliance culture is organized around risk. So compliance cultures use a legalistic approach to ethics. On the other hand, a values-based approach to ethical corporate cultures tend to rely on the explicit mission statement, which defines the firm as well as how customers and employees should be treated at all times. The crux of any ethical culture is a top-down integrity with shared values, norms that provide guides for behavior, invisible artifacts such as codes of ethics that provide a standard of conduct for every employee's behavior on a given day. You should also know what we mean by differential association. Differential association refers to the idea that people learn ethical or unethical behavior while they're interacting with others who are part of their role sets or other intimate personal groups in the organization, in the department, or in the industry. A variety of studies have supported the notion that such differential associations do influence ethical decision making. Usually superiors have a very strong influence on the ethics of their employees at the lower level. Also, younger managers especially tend to go along with their superiors' moral judgments to demonstrate loyalty. So compliance-oriented programs tend to encourage everybody not to question the superior's judgment or decisions, which can be counterproductive to ethical decision making. So we need to obviously encourage younger individuals and older individuals to equally question and to be empowered to present their views and their concerns without any fears of retaliation. As managers and founders and senior influential leaders in any organization, sometimes you can actually encourage whistleblowing. Whistleblowing means exposing an employer's wrongdoing to outsiders, to the external part of the community or those who are external to the company, such as the media or government regulatory agencies. Now, we don't want whistleblowers to necessarily go outside, but you can have whistleblowers come inside to report an issue before it is reported to the outside. This way, the company has an opportunity to fix it. If your employees are loyal and committed to your organization, chances are they'll come to you as the influential leaders to fix the problem before they go outside if it is not fixed. Sometimes interpersonal conflict ensues when employees think that they know the right course of action in a given situation, yet their work group or company promotes or requires a different unethical decision. So this is where you may have a conflict between what you think you should be doing and what your team or group or company wants you to do. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SOX, as well as the federal sentencing guidelines for organizations, do have institutionalized internal whistleblowing to encourage discovery of misconduct in any organization. Also, the Dodd-Frank Act proposed additional incentives for whistleblowers. Since its beginning in 2011, so this program of whistleblowing has awarded millions of dollars to those who blew the whistle. Retaliation is still a concern for whistleblowers, and they often have a difficult time winning their cases. Most public companies are creating computer systems that encourage reporting misconduct internally, also called internal whistleblowing. Even before Sarbanes-Oxley, an increasing number of companies set anonymous reporting services and hotlines so employees who had a concern, they could actually speak about it or report it. The majority of employees report misconduct to their immediate supervisors. However, when they feel uncomfortable, then there has to be some other way of reporting it so they don't fear retaliation or they don't feel uncomfortable working their immediate boss, especially if the immediate boss is part of the problem. Now, who would be the receiver of reports of misconduct usually when you have employees blowing the whistle or reporting at least to others? Generally, the reporting location or individual could be immediate supervisor, top managers, human resource management department or professionals, hotlines or even helpline. You can have ethics officers or ombudsmen. Let us talk about how leaders influence the corporate culture. Organizational leaders can use their power in influence to shape the overall corporate culture that sustains certain norms, certain behaviors within that environment. So leaders should be both effective and ethical because they do have a huge amount of influence. Power shapes corporate cultures. So what do we mean by power? Well, traditionally, power refers to the influence that a person or a leader or a manager can have over the behavior and decisions of others in the organization. Some of those other individuals could be the direct report or the employees, and others that they influence could be peers, which respects their opinions or their views. So a person can have power over others when his or her presence causes them to behave differently. There are 5 general sources of power or power bases which a person may exercise in the workplace. You can have reward power, which refers to a person's ability to influence the behavior of other employees by offering something that they want, something that is desirable to them. You can also have coercive power, which is essentially the opposite of reward power. So instead of rewarding a person for doing something, coercive power penalizes those actions and behaviors so it does not get repeated again. Coercive power breaks down relationships in the long term, though. You can have legitimate power, which stems from the belief that a certain person has the right to exert influence and that certain others have an obligation to accept it because of the person's position, power perhaps, or legitimate expertise. The titles and positions of authority that an organization bestows upon individuals tend to appeal to the traditional view of power. You can have expert power, which is derived from a person's overall knowledge, certification, expertise, his or her degrees, or the perception that that person possesses certain knowledge. So that expertise power can be very influential in any workplace. And finally, you're going to have referent power, which may exist when one person perceives that his or her goals or objectives are very similar to another person's. In the case of referent power, the second person may attempt to influence the first to take action that will lead both to achieve their objectives. For this power relationship to be effective, some sort of empathy must exist between the individuals. So referent power is basically the respect or the admiration that others have for you, and therefore they follow you simply because they admire you, and the goal could be mutually beneficial for both parties. There are going to be some motivational elements which drives ethical behavior in any workplace as well. Motivation is usually a force that is within the individual that focuses his or her behavior toward achieving a specific goal. Job performance is usually considered to be a function of both a person's ability and his or her motivation level. So job performance is basically equal to ability multiplied by motivation, meaning that workers can be motivated, but resources and know-how are also needed to get the job done. Just because I'm motivated to operate on you or pull your teeth out because you have so much pain in it, doesn't mean I can do it. I need knowledge, skill, expertise, and resources to do it properly. Otherwise, unfortunately, you may die because I'm operating on you or pulling your tooth. So motivation alone is not enough. On the other hand, to create motivation, an organization offers incentives to encourage those employees and workers to work toward organizational objectives. An individual's hierarchy of needs may influence his or her motivation in ethical behaviors in the workplace as well. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs could be a basic motivational theory that everybody should learn and understand in order to guide and motivate others in the workplace. After the basic needs such as food, working conditions, or our existence needs and survival are satisfied, then related needs and growth needs become important. And as you may recall from previous literature readings, related needs are satisfied by social and interpersonal relationships in your department, your workplace, or in the industry. And growth needs are satisfied by creative or productive activities that you and I might be involved in the workplace. Needs or goals may change as a person progresses through the ranks of the company. So organizations should have relevant organizational structures to help employees meet their basic needs as well as their relatedness or growth needs in the workplace so they can remain motivated at all times. When it comes to organizational structures, the two broad structures for organizations are centralized and decentralized. Note that these are not mutually exclusive structures. In a centralized organization, decision-making authority is usually concentrated in the hands of the top or senior managers, and very little authority is delegated to lower level managers or employees. Centralized organizations trust formal rules, policies, and procedures that are backed up with elaborate control systems and monitoring processes. Some ethical concerns may arise in centralized organizations because they typically have little upward communication from employees to managers. In a decentralized organization, decision-making authority is delegated as far down as the chain of command as possible. In other words, the people who are closest to the customer, to the product, or to the service, the decision-making is given to them because hopefully they can solve it much more faster or much more quickly in order to respond to the needs of their customers or clients. The decentralized organizations have relatively few formal rules, and coordination and control are usually informal and somewhat impersonal. They focus instead on increasing the flow of communication between the top level and the bottom level in the organization. Because of the strict formalization in implementation of ethics policies and procedures in a centralized organizations, they tend to be more ethical in their practices than decentralized organizations. Research shows that because of the strict formalization and implementation of ethics policies and procedures in centralized firms, they tend to be more ethical in their practices than decentralized organizations. Because sometimes employees at the lowest level or managers at the lowest level, they make decisions based on their own values, which may not be aligned with that of the organizations. Therefore, it might lead to unethical practices. Centralized organizations may also exert more influence on their employees because they have a central core of policies and codes of ethical conduct where managers or the decision makers are well trained on, and perhaps they understand the reason and the rationale behind them. Decentralized organizations give employees extensive decision-making autonomy because management empowers employees. This decentralized empowerment could create ambiguity that may be confusing for newer managers and newer employees at times. Decentralized corporate cultures can avoid ethical dilemmas through the use of effective codes of conduct and ethics in training. Unethical behavior is possible in either centralized or decentralized structures when specific corporate cultures permit or even encourage workers to deviate from accepted standards or to ignore corporate legal and ethical responsibilities. Research also shows that centralized firms may have a more difficult time uprooting unethical activities than decentralized organizations. Let us reflect upon the variation in employee conduct for a few minutes. A substantial amount of research indicates that significant differences exist in the values and philosophies which influence how the individuals that comprise corporations make ethical decisions. About 10% of the employees take advantage of the situation to further their own interest. And 40% go along with the work group on most matters. About 40% always try to follow the company policies and rules, but they're not likely to speak out against those who choose to go with the work group. And about 10% try to maintain formal ethical standards that they believe to be right and correct and superior to the values of others and even to the company's value system. So let us look at this a little bit more closely because it's good research that is discussed in your textbook. If you look at variation of employee conduct, you're always likely to have some superstars who always are highly concerned about the ethics of an organization, and then there might be some individuals who are not as concerned as everybody else. So you can have the top 10%, the bottom 10%, and others in the middle. So in the research that is discussed in the textbook, you can see that the top 10% follow their own values and beliefs, and they believe that their values are superior to those of others in the company. And then you can have the bottom 10%, they take advantage of the situation if the penalty is less than the benefit and the risk of being caught is low. And then next to the highly ethical people, you have the next 40%. Those are individuals who always try to follow the company policies and stay within the rules and regulations. And then the other 40% go along with the work group. So sometimes if there's a high amount of pressure to do what is wrong, they may simply go with the work group, even though they themselves might make a different decision, but because of the pressure, they go along with the group. Now, those who are considered to be the least ethical or the bottom 10%, they take advantage of the situation to further their own personal interests, to fatten up their own pockets. They're more likely to manipulate, to cheat, and to act in a self-serving manner for themselves, for their own teammates or cronies in a way. They may choose to take office supplies from work for personal use if the only penalty they suffer is paying for the supplies. And the lower the risk of being caught, the higher the likelihood that a 10% most likely to take advantage of the company will be involved in unethical activities in your workplace. Unfortunately, when I was a manager, we did have people who fell into this category. Some of these individuals were immediately terminated for stealing and theft. Others were reprimanded orally in a written format to prevent and deter this wrongdoing in future incidents. Then you have the middle 40. These are the 40% that is next to the bottom, and they go along on most matters. They're most concerned about the social implications of their actions and want to fit in within the organization and the group. They're easily influenced by what the people around them are doing, so the social pressure can be strong on them. They may know using office supplies for personal use is wrong or improper, yet they may view it as acceptable because their coworkers do it, because it is something that everybody does. It's normal, etc., etc. And in this middle 40% also can rationalize their actions by saying that the use of office supplies is a benefit of working there at the particular company, and it must be acceptable because the company does not enforce a policy which prohibits this type of behavior. And finally, they rationalize that no one will get into trouble for doing what everybody else is doing anyhow. And then you have the top 40%. They always try to follow the company policies and rules. They have a strong grasp of acceptable behavior, and they attempt to comply with the codes of ethics, with ethics training expectations and other communications about appropriate conduct in the department or in the company. If the policy is prohibiting taking office supplies from work, then these employees probably will observe it and not take any supplies home. And they're not likely to speak out about the 40% who choose to go along with the work group. So that's a disadvantage of this group. They do not commit wrong, but they don't report those who are involved in wrongdoing. This top 40% also prefer to focus on their jobs and steer clear of any organizational misconduct. If the company fails to communicate standards of appropriate behavior, members of this group will devise their own. Then you have the top 10% of employees who seem to be highly mature individuals. They maintain formal ethical standards that focus on rights, duties, and rules. They embrace values that assert certain inalienable rights and actions, which they perceive to be always ethically correct. They believe that their values are right and superior to the values of others or even to the company's value system. The top 10% have a tendency to report or speak out about employees or firm misconduct, even if the company defines it as ethical. Members of this top 10% group will probably report colleagues who take office supplies. So I hope that you can be in the top 10%. That should be your goal. Nonetheless, be a highly mature and a highly ethical individual in every instance. Good luck. So can people control their own actions within a corporate culture? We know that a popular way of viewing business ethics is to see it as a reflection of the alternative moral philosophies that workers use to resolve their personal moral dilemmas in any given workplace. Ethical decisions within organizations are often made by committees in formal and informal groups, not necessarily by individuals. Both individual ethics and organizational ethics have an impact on an employee's ethical intention. If there is ethical congruence between the individual ethics and the organizational ethical culture, then there is an increase in the potential for making ethical choices in the organizational decision-making process. So that fit or congruence between individual ethics and organizational ethical culture is very, very important when it comes to hiring employees who are aligned with your corporate culture, and also when training employees so they can be aligned with your corporate culture. Then ethical decision making will increase in any given day. So as discussed in organizational and behavior classes, you need to be concerned about individual behaviors, about team or work group behaviors, and organizational structures that guide people to either go this way or to go this way. Make sure employees are provided with incentives and even penalties to go in the right direction. So organizational structure should be designed in such a way where people are encouraged to behave ethically and in alignment with the corporate values. Good luck. Remember that the only way to build and enhance the muscles of your professional brand is to chisel it through high standards and ethical behaviors at all times. This is the only way that you can fall in the top 10% to make a brand name for yourself, that you are always concerned about what is fair, what is right, what is ethical, and what is acceptable based on legal standards as well. Remember that ethical behavior is a skill at the individual level and at the organizational level. You, your colleagues in organizational structures should always, at all times, be evaluated, be monitored, and improved to make sure everybody has strong ethical muscles, and to make sure that the organization is not going to be involved in misconduct by individuals, by teams and groups, or by the general organization's culture. Good luck being a highly ethical business person, a highly ethical human being, and a highly ethical policymaker for your department, for your company, for your industry, and for your nation, and for the global community. Good luck.